Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Jason.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
And Joel, today I've got somebody here who I've been wanting to introduce you to for a couple months. His name is Bob Martin. Bob was on the show with us in November. I think it was November.
I think so.
About that, yeah, okay. And in the course of our conversation, we discovered that Bob has something in common with you, Joel. He's got a background with fostering, foster families.
Well, that's awesome. That's amazing.
Well, this could be fun.
I'm not exactly fostering now.
Well, not directly fostering, but
Yeah.
but the realm. Let's put it that way.
The realm, yeah.
Yes.
I work in that area. I work. Yeah. I'm a lawyer. I represent parents whose kids. Echo. I represent parents whose kids have been taken, but sometimes I have the great privilege of taking some of the kids in the foster care system and putting them through one of my meditation classes, and that's really exciting.
That's good stuff.
That's where I thought it was going to be an interesting conversation, because Joel also indirectly has worked with, well, also directly, but he has been indirectly brought into that community in a huge way over time, so that he's played a significant role in helping mainly young boys turn their lives around, particularly the ones who were considered the unadoptable ones, the troublemakers, the worst cases, and so forth. And I thought, well, geez, there's got to be a conversation in here between the two of you on that. So yeah, well, why don't you give Joel a little bit more about the background? Like, how did you get into that? How did that all get started?
So I mean, let me see. The Reader's Digest version is grew up in an amusement park family. My dad's path to the American dream was through popcorn and cotton candy. And much to his dismay, I wound up becoming a lawyer, you know. And,
wow, what a disappointment, Bob.
No, it really was. I mean, later on in life, I decided that I would open a sub shop in the college town that I live in. And I went down, I showed him all the plans and what equipment we were going to have. And he would sit there, he'd rub his chin and ask me questions like, why do you charge less for a 12-inch than 2 6-inches? And stuff like that. And when I finally, he asked all his questions, and I says, so now we are going to be in the soap business, huh? You're finally going to do something productive with your life instead of being a blood-sucking vulture.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, supportive.
But he was proud of me. He was.
I love the accent.
Anyway, one thing led to another. I was representing a bunch of mobsters and Colombians in the cartel days of the Miami Vice, and my life was going to the pits, seeing a therapist. Therapist turns out he is the English language editor and a disciple of a 72nd generation Taoist master from the Shaolin Temple.
Wow.
72nd generation. Think about that. 1,400 years handing wisdom down from parent to child, parent to child.
I think the most impressive thing is that they were actually able to track that 72 generations. That's
wow. Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely, that was trackable. And so I met this guy, Master Watching Knee, and he's just one of those people that blows you away. You know, kind of just like Walt. You know, you meet Walt one time and it just blows you away. You know, it's like totally unforgettable.
Well, my week is made. I've been just compared to a Shaolin priest. Okay.
Wow.
Okay. So anyway, I studied under him for a while, and that led to Buddhism. Buddhism led to meditation. Meditation led to a transformation in my life. Went back to school, got a master's in social work, and then instead of representing mobsters and making less oodles and oodles of money, I had to move to North Carolina from Miami because I ran into a little difference of opinion, we'll call it. with my client, and so I moved there. And once I got there, it was nothing but public service and community service and taking care of what Jesus might have called the least of these. And so as a lawyer, I got involved in the abuse, neglect, and dependency courts. And so I worked there for a long time, and then I kind of retired from law in 2015, although I kept my finger in the A&D court. And because I got to know all the social workers there, and because I got to know, that whole world and all those folks, one day I talked to one of the guys involved in the programming, and I said, I think I would love to take some of the kids in the foster system and see how meditation maps on for them, if it makes a difference with them. And sure enough, man, I tell you, they took to it like fish to water. They loved it. And you could just see their minds open up. The way that I teach meditation is every time they meditate, they log it, and I read the logs and I respond to the logs. So there was this access that I had to actually, like, the detailed workings of how their minds were changing. And it was wonderful. And so that's how I got connected to the foster system.
Wow, that's they don't normally, kids in foster care don't normally have access to that type of modality or concepts, and that's something that when I work with foster care kids, I'm a life coach, and Medicaid is all they have, and they certainly won't cover my services.
Right.
But I introduce a lot of the same things: mindset, meditations, binaural beats. There's a lot of stuff that's really effective, and Walt and I've always discussed. I believe children are much more pliable and open to these concepts than adults. So, so I find it that you have an audience that is really, once they do it and really appreciate it, it's far better than some 50-year-old that like maybe has a lot of doubt. 12, 15-year-olds will just jump right in, and they're really good at it. The brain's still a little more neuroplastic than the older guys, and it helps a lot. So the fact you ran across that is that's the stuff we need a lot more of. The kid, young people you work with greatly benefited by that. But there's thousands and thousands of kids in foster care that have very minimal therapeutic response to anything. And if it is, it's usually here's 15 different medications and check back in 1 month and we'll see how you're doing.
Yeah. I like to think of it by just simply saying that the conditioning hasn't calcified yet.
Yes.
Walt, can you be my politically correct coach here and tell me if it's okay to use the S word? Is it okay to use the S word?
The FCC has nothing to do with what we do here.
Okay. So all of the shit messages that they get, that you're a piece of shit and you're not good enough and all that, it hadn't turned to stone yet. It's still pliable. They're still able to say, well, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm an okay person. And so it's great to be able to intervene, while the mind is still pliable like that.
It really is. And I have an example. There's a case that Walt and I have talked about for many years. And I have a young man that his caseworker approached me. The kid at the time was probably 12. And I think I use the names. I don't know what I'm using.
We were using Marcus with him.
Marcus. Okay. So Marcus is this, he comes and sees me. He's a little guy, probably about 4'7", very polite, great personality. And he comes in my office and I said, well, tell me what's been going on, where you're at, do my normal stuff. And he says, well, I got put in foster care, and while I'm in foster care, my mom was in prison. She got killed in prison. And so I said, oh my gosh, that's terrible. And one of the first things he asked me, he says, well, do you want to know how that makes me feel? I go, what do you mean? And he goes, well, every therapist I've ever seen, after I tell them my mom dies, their question is, how does it make you feel? I said, well, I think it probably made you feel like shit. I'm going to go out on a limb and just assume that was what happened. And he laughed. And so we started to develop a rapport. And so he was on multiple different medications. And I was asking him the stuff he liked to do. And, he this is a really bright kid, but he was just acting like an ass at his foster home and school. He was acting up. And again, as you were saying about, he was playing into the narrative that had been there. You're depressed. He described he was defined with oppositional defiant disorder and depression and like 15 different diagnoses and 9 different psychotropic medications and just this, just what a horrible place he was in. And so I was asking him questions about his just different things. And I said, what medication are you on? And the first one he suggested was Prozac. And I said, okay. So and I'm playing really stupid when I'm talking to him, like he's explaining to me. I said, so what does Prozac do? And he said, well, it's for depression. I said, do you have depression? And he goes, yes. And I go, why do you think you're depressed? And he goes, now he's getting frustrated. He goes, because my mom died and I'm in foster care. And I go, okay. So that's good. So what does Prozac do for you? And he said, well, it does something for a brain chemical. I said, oh, is that the serotonin? He goes, yeah. And I said, and so he's thinking like, this guy's really stupid. I'm having to explain to him this information. And I said, okay. So the part that has me confused is, what does a lack of serotonin have to do with you having your mom died and being in foster care? I just don't understand that. And his little brain, his eyes opened up real big, and he started thinking, it's nothing. I said, first of all, you have been acting like a little ass, but you've been acting like a little ass because you're behaving to the narrative that's been given to you. And this kid immediately he talked about being pliable and open to the idea. I said, there's nothing wrong with you. Yes, you're depressed. Your mom died. You should be. We need to work on that. That's a narrative. But the fact you're on all of this different medication, you're acting like an idiot in class, that's on you because you're responding. And he like the moment he bought into that, he went home and he told his foster care mom immediately, I'm sorry, I've been acting like an ass. I'm going to change that. I literally told her that. And next day at school, she went up, and every teacher loves to hear this from a 6th grader, walked up to the teacher and said, I have really been bad. Could you move me to the front of the class? I got a lot of catching up to do. I'm not going to behave badly anymore. And he literally did those 2 moves and changed. And the next thing, he asked me to go to a psychiatrist's appointment where he basically destroyed his psychiatrist up and down and just asked him why he was on these medications. And he basically fired a psychiatrist on the spot. Eventually he got off everything but a little ADHD medication. And 2 years later, he was adopted. Now he's in college and thriving. But the narrative that you're talking about he was very open to changing the narrative. It hadn't calcified, as you're saying. It was like, wow, he immediately accepted it.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. And, the adults that we work with, unfortunately, after 20, 30 years, after not only are they hearing the messages from outside, but they're sui generis is what we say in the law. On their own, when the judge comes up with an idea on its own, well, it's sui generis. But when it's finally sui generis, when you start repeating the negative messages and they're coming from that committee in your head, they're not coming from an outside person.
Yes.
That means that you have now adopted them as your reality. That is your reality. And yeah, so what we work with in meditation is to, without getting into the sensitive stuff, start dealing with stuff which we call, low volume things, and just help people to understand that they're not their thoughts, to break away from the idea that they're living inside of their thoughts. If I have a thought, that is who I am. And then if I can get you to the place where you say, wait a minute, I just said I had a thought. So if I said I had a thought, then, well, wait a minute. Who is the I that's having the thought? And when that question comes up and they start asking that question, well, then who am I if I'm not my thoughts? Then we can make some progress.
Yes. And once you get into that subconscious programming, you start being able to get that rewiring. It becomes a whole different narrative, and it's beyond foster care kids. That's sort of what I do in my practice. Like you're talking about, you're not your thoughts. They're, we tend to believe that. You're not able to separate that, but understanding that the programming we receive as children you know, I don't know if you're familiar with a lot of the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, the epigenetics guy. Um, Wonderful man. He talks a lot about the subconscious programming that we get as kids last a lifetime. There's one of my friends was he's a doctor, and when he was 5 years old, he came home from school, and he drew a picture of a cowboy on a horse, and his teacher wrote, "Good job." So he was very proud of this. So he came home. It was about 2 in the afternoon. His mom and her best friend were getting drunk on wine, and they proceeded to put the picture on the refrigerator and make fun of it, the disproportionate stuff, and laughed at it. He immediately just ran upstairs crying and said he would never paint again. He would never do art again. And he didn't. He went on to be a doctor, uh, thriving, very successful neurosurgeon, you know, obviously a really smart guy. He had the obligatory 40-year-old divorce, and then he met a younger woman who introduced him to art. She owned an art gallery, and because he's courting a woman, he had to go to do all this. He had a programming that he couldn't do, art. Turns out he was really good at art. It was really good at art. He ended up having his own gallery, own showing, and he's a very well-known painter now, as well as still being a neurosurgeon. So the programming that he received as a child, it occupied until something came along and broke that up. And you know, we all have those going on. I promise you, we could go through the list of things we believe that aren't true. You know, we all of us, even me today. But you're so right. That becomes just default. That's why generational poverty, generational dysfunction, it just keeps being handed off, and you can interrupt it like you're talking about doing, but most people don't ever get around to interrupting it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's challenging. I mean, because both of you guys are dealing with challenging people who have been massively challenged in their own lives. And somebody like that, you know, that's
yes.
not easy one to get around.
Yeah, that's true, Walt. But you know, it's funny, but you find out that a lot of folks who seem like they're, you know, running just very normal lives, that you know, that you colleagues that you have at work, people that, you know, the clerks at the supermarket. Sometimes it's really surprising that, you know, they're dealing with a lot of their there's a lot of suffering that's going on, and most of it, you know, we can cope with. One of my favorite folks was the father of positive psychology, and whose name just flies out of my head at the moment.
Marty Seligman.
But yeah, Marty Seligman, and Marty got his fame from something called learned helplessness.
Yes.
And what he did was he put a dog in a cage, and it had shock pads on the bottom. The floor was all shocking, and there was glass walls all around. And he would shock the dog. Couldn't do this today because it's kind of cruel. But he shocked the dog, and after a while, the dog would learn that he couldn't escape, and he would just stand there and get the shock. And so he made this hypothesis that we learn to become helpless. And then when the glass wall was taken away and all the dog had to do was step across to relieve himself of the shock, he wouldn't do it because he had learned that he was helpless. And then at one point,
just to let you know, Bob, I read 2/3 of that book, got so depressed, I put it down and never picked it up again. And I'm not kidding.
Well, yeah, it was too bad, because in the other third is when he went and told you why he was wrong. But that's what he did. At one point, he goes and says, well, if learned helplessness, if that accounts for why people stay in these terrible situations in the inner city and they don't, you know, strive to break out of it, is because of learned helplessness. And then one day he's sitting there and he goes, wow, like I could have had a V8, you know, like it's this big moment. And he goes, I'm studying the wrong people. I'm studying the ones that get stuck. I should be studying the ones that, in spite of everything, break out. Those are the ones that I should be studying. And so he said famously in one time that he was asking, well, what's positive psychology? And he said, most of psychology wants to move you from sick to not sick, from like -20 to 0. But why can't psychology move you from normal to extraordinary? Why can't it move you from normal to flourishing? So he started studying the psychology of flourishing and what it really means to develop the perspectives and the ways of seeing life so that you actually live a joyful, effective, efficient life, and the like. And I just love his stuff. And this, the whole concept that it's almost like the way we look at our medical profession. You know, the doctors are designed to make you better when you're sick. Why don't we have a medical profession that keeps you healthy? Right?
And more ironically, why do they call it healthcare when it's not?
When it's not, right? It's sick care. It's right. It's sick care, right? So all that stuff, you know, is just really great stuff. And the thing about meditation that I have come to understand is that so many of the it's not inconsistent. It's not different from so many other modalities that help people, you know, get their shit together. But it is probably the most counterintuitive of the modalities. You know, like you know, coach. You know, if you liken it to, you know, a football player or a yoga coach, you know, you'll see the person practicing and you'll say, you know, well, you could move your foot a little bit over to the right, or, you know, bring your elbow up a couple of inches, and just those little adjustments will help people become more effective and efficient. And in meditation, it's kind of counterintuitive because we don't really coach folks. We do coach. We coach them to allow their shit to continue rolling. So it's kind of counterintuitive. It's like, you know, you can't make yourself stop thinking negative thoughts, but you can increase your positive thinking.
That is the key. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Carol Dweck, who wrote what is it? Growth mindset lady. She talks about growth mindset versus, you know, the helplessness, and she took some of her work, and, you know, one of the studies you mentioned that you couldn't repeat because of shocking the dogs. One of the other studies that I found extremely cruel but simultaneously fascinating is they took rats and they put them in a big vat of water where they couldn't get out, and they just would swim until they died. Basically, they'd swim and give up and said, I can't do it. So they would let them die, as sad as that is. And then they put rats in there and let them swim. And the average was about 2 minutes before they gave up. They would give 2 minutes, didn't do it, they just give up and die. Then they put rats in the water, and right before they went under, they pulled them up, revived them, and put them back in the water. Now, rats now understood there's a way out. They would go for, they quit timing them after about an hour. They would go nonstop because there was a belief that there was something that would get them out instead of giving up. So the rats responded. There's also a big study with fleas where you put a bunch of fleas in a jar and you put a lid on it, and they live their life with the lid on the thing. Then you take off the lid. They only still jump as high as where the lid was. They don't go any higher. They're conditioned to only go that high. So there is a lot of that supporting, but like you're saying, you reprogram that. It isn't, you know, that's one of the best things that you said, in my opinion, is you can't stop negative thoughts. That's just something that doesn't exist. But you can increase the positive, which then eventually there's a shift overall. Like Walt and I've been working together for a long time on this, and we're law of attraction based, obviously. And once I realized that it's not about trying to stop that other stuff, it's about bringing this in, change the perspective. Then by default, the negative stuff goes away by default.
Right.
Yeah, that to me is the key right there, because you're right. You can't totally eliminate negative thoughts, but the funny thing is, when you improve how you feel about things, the negative thoughts slow to a trickle.
Well, they may slow to a trickle, or they may seem like they slow to a trickle because by comparison they're balanced out.
Well, I think also what happens is we can we recondition ourselves to expect better things to happen, and so it's like the new car syndrome. You expect to see the Toyota Camry that you just bought, so you start to see Camrys everywhere. And the same thing happens here. You start to expect having more positive thoughts, and sure enough, you end up having more positive thoughts, which kind of doesn't leave room for the negative thoughts anymore. There's not not enough headspace going on.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's for me. I grew up in just the absolute craziest childhood you've seen. Had a lot of trauma. Had a lot of addiction. I lost everything. I went to jail. I just, everything you can imagine going on. And I had such a negative internal dialogue that kept being delivered to me on a daily basis. And when I discovered that it wasn't instantaneous by any means, it took for a long time. But like right now, I am so conditioned I expect things to work out. I have a 10 to 15 year track record of things working out in epic manner for me. I expect it to. And it just doesn't, I'm not saying that, when somebody pulls out in front of me, I do have some negative thoughts that they're doing 10 miles an hour, and I can express that verbally to myself, at least in the car. But generally, I just know whatever's going to happen is definitely going to be to my benefit, even though if it seems negative at the moment. I just have experienced that for so long. So the negative thoughts just either, like you're saying, they may present, but I don't even give them credibility anymore.
Yeah, it's as if they fade into background noise, like sirens in a city.
Yes.
When you live in a city, there's sirens all the time, but it's just background noise. It's going on all the time. You don't even notice it. And if you notice it and you listen to it, you go, oh yeah, there's a siren right there. There it is. There it is.
Oh yeah, you can.
For the most part, it's just
yeah. And that's one of the reasons that I've been on a several-year news blackout. I don't watch the news. I have no idea what's going on. In fact, people, I live in the Richmond, Virginia area, and we had a little storm come through, and it knocked out the water. It was this crazy, locked out the electricity, this crazy chain of events. And I didn't even know what storm was coming. Nobody told me. It was like, yeah, wow, I didn't know that was about to happen. And you get to a place where, you do hear background noise at the gym, or I go to the gym, people will be talking about these different events, but you just allow the programming that I want to allow in. And it's really fascinating when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating to me too, because it's fascinating to see people who make both kinds of choices. Just today, I do 2 shows on Monday. The show I did earlier today was with a gentleman who is a very strong advocate of energy healing and so forth, coming, interestingly enough, from an MIT background with engineering and software and computers and all that kind of stuff. But the one thing that caught my attention more than anything else about him is that he didn't seem to totally grasp how much he was still caught in the traps that he thought he had escaped from. In other words, that the pattern had become so deeply ingrained that it was like those sirens. He didn't even know it was there. And he had made progress, because he had talked about some really bad down and out hitting bottom situations. He had some pretty bad ones too. So he had done quite a bit of growth because of that. And yet it's fascinating to see how much was still left that he was still dealing with, that he still felt trapped. I mean, for instance, he spent a large portion of his life out on the West Coast. So he finds himself very affected by all of the fires that are going on right now on the West Coast. And to the point where, I mean, you could just see it on his face. It was draining energy out of him. Contrast that with Joel, who may not even know that the fires are going on. Not even aware of it. 2 entirely different mindsets, 2 entirely different training, modality trainings, I guess you could call them.
It's kind of like, we're like onions that, we at some point we say, oh, this paperish peel here, this brown stuff, let me kind of like wipe that off. Okay. Oh, here's this kind of greenish tint stuff, but that doesn't really look like it's good onion either. So let me peel that off. And then you get to the next layer and you think that you've made some progress, and you find there's a sweeter layer underneath, and another and another and another.
Absolutely.
And for our whole lives, that's going to be what we're going to do for our whole lives. But Joel, you raised an issue. Let me be a devil's advocate for a moment about that, because like I say, I teach my meditation now, and I'm so thrilled that Elon University has actually allowed me to have a credited course.
Wow.
It's a 2-credit course that we get to teach the kids, and of course the kids self-select. It's not a requirement; it's an elective, and so they choose it. And generally, I find that they choose it because they've got a lot of anxiety. They're concerned about anything from climate change and what the world's going to look like when they're 40 or 50, to where their next job's going to come from, to whether they're going to do well on their next exam, whatever it may be. But there's a lot of high anxiety. And there's also, one of the things that I notice about them is that I'm not going to call them stupid, but I mean, some of them don't even know what checks and balances in our government, what the concept of checks and balances, or that there are even 3 co-equal branches of government. And if they do say, yeah, I know that, and they, well, what are they? So there is
Social Security, Medicare, and the IRS. That would be my guess.
So I notice that their lack of knowledge of the system that they live in actually contributes to their anxiety more than gives them any kind of peace of mind by avoiding it, because it's as if they walk around knowing that somebody's going to whack them upside the head, but not knowing where it's going to come from. And
Sure.
so when you say, I avoid the news, I think that's good to an extent, as long as we stay connected to the system that we're in, so that we kind of understand it. Because understanding, one of the things that Master Nee taught us, for when I studied, for all those years with him, we asked him, Master Nee, you're called a master. Okay, you're master watching Nee. Why do you get the name master? And he says, well, because I've gained mastery in life. Oh, okay, that deserves a question. What does mastery in life look like? So he said, mastery in life is learning how to interfere with things to the least amount possible and expend the least energy while still being effective and efficient and impactful. And we go, okay, so, what does that look like? So his explanation was, well, if you've got a really good idea and nobody seems like they want to listen to you, shut the fuck up.
I love it.
But he said, but don't just sit there in blind silence. Know that there's going to come a time when they are going to come back to you and say, what was that you wanted to tell me? And when they do, be prepared to say it as effectively and as efficiently. Refine your thoughts, have them together. So when they come back and the time has changed and you are aware that the flow is now with you, that you can proceed, with great energy and great wisdom. So don't just back away, and wait in a wise way, so that the flow. And so one of the things that I notice about my kids is they don't have a clue, as to the flow of the system around them. And sometimes that just, that kind of breaks my heart a little bit, because I see how anxious they are. And I wish that was something that, I was helping them teach, but that's not my topic.
But here's a question for you, though.
Yeah.
If what you're saying is true, and I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, what is it that in your mind is going to shift their attention away from being anxious about that? Is the knowledge of it going to do it, or is it going to be something else?
I have a little phrase. I call it the work ethic of happiness.
Okay.
Okay. And so I think that, and your show is a primary example. We have a right to be happy. I mean, we're human beings. That gives us, just because, this is my own opinion, but just because I'm a human being, there's a certain dignity that I am given. I can piss it away, or I can make use of it. But there's something important about that. And I love the phrase from Desiderata: you are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars.
Mm-hmm.
And if even if you don't understand it, the universe is unfolding exactly as it should.
Mm-hmm.
You have a right to be happy. And I believe that. I don't know if it is an absolute truth or not. I choose to make it my truth.
Well, Thomas
So,
Jefferson thought it was, so you're in good company.
Yeah. Okay. So, so where was I going? I'm just thinking. So where was I going with that?
I hate it when that happens.
I hate it when that happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a right to be happy. And
Well, that's right. It'll come back.
It'll
always
come
comes
back.
Yeah, give it a few
Always
more
comes
minutes. But yeah, I think there's validity to that. I do have a question that I wanted to follow up though.
Sure.
Because you were saying to Joel, okay, well, I want to play a little bit devil's advocate here. So I want to play a little bit devil's advocate with what you
Okay.
were
Okay. All right. All right.
You were kind of remorseful that people didn't really have a full grasp of how, first of all, what the three branches of government are, and how the system works. By the way, in case you're wondering, it's executive, legislative, and judicial. You can look it up.
Yeah.
But all that aside, you also made another interesting comment. You made a comment about how eventually it comes around to you, which I think is true. And so the question I want to ask you in kind of that devil's advocate viewpoint is, if it all is going to come around to you, how much do you really need to know how the structure works?
You don't, but you need to know where you are on the cycle. Okay? So here's the metaphor. You're out in the ocean and you want to get to shore. So there's a couple of different ways that you can approach the problem. One, you can panic and drown. Okay? Probably not. It probably requires the most energy and it's the least impactful. The
Martin
other
Seligman
is
would
that
probably study you about 25 years ago, but we'll leave that one alone. Yeah.
What's that?
Martin Seligman would probably study you about 25 years ago.
Yeah, right. The other way is to say, that's where I got to go. I'm just going to swim like heck and get there. And you may very well get to shore, but you're going to be tired and have spent a lot of energy.
Mm.
Or you can take a look at the tide and you can notice that sometimes it's going towards the shore and sometimes it's going away from the shore.
Mm.
So if I can align myself with the times that I'm in, when it's going towards the shore, I'm going to extend and expend my maximum amount of energy. I can make the most progress at that moment. So I'm going to go full speed ahead. But then it's going to turn around. It's going to go against me. Now, I would be foolish to fight it, but I would be foolish to let it take me out to sea and destroy my progress. So I want to kind of use just the amount of energy that's going to keep me in the same position. And I'm going to regain my energy and I'm going to restore my energy and I'm just going to hold my position and wait until the tide turns again. Then I'm going to swim like heck. And then I'm going to hold and swim like heck and hold and swim like heck. And by doing that, I'm going to get to shore. I will have used the least amount of energy necessary, and I would have been the most impactful and the most effective and the most efficient. Now, Master Nee says that you can learn to feel the flow of even the dynamics when you're in a conversation with someone. You can begin to feel whether this is a time to move forward with an idea or whether you need to pull back, whether you need to darken the light or whether you need to brighten the light, etc. And there are ways in Taoism, there are practices that teach you how to become sensitive to that energy. Now, law of attraction, you certainly feel like there is a certain energy that we can send out into the universe and that there's a certain response to it. So all that Taoism differs from that is that that's the long-term energy. Taoism wants to take a look at the short-term energy, like what is going on at this moment and how can I best align myself with it.
I'm also reminded of the comments of Abraham Hicks. I don't know if you're familiar with Abraham Hicks, but
No.
they have a somewhat similar water analogy. In their case, the analogy is paddling on a river. And what they say is, well, you can paddle upstream or you can paddle downstream. You can go either way you want. But what you need to know is that everything you want is downstream.
Right. And the trap, though, the trap of thinking that you can paddle downstream is to think you can lay back in the canoe and go, la-di-da-di-da, life is but a dream, and just, take your hands off the wheel. No. Yeah, you got to paddle downstream, but you still have to navigate. You still have to look for the best way. You want to avoid the rocks. You don't want to run aground. You want to go, in the best way that you can and steer it effectively and efficiently. So there is a certain trap. A lot of people, when they hear go with the flow, they say, oh, well, I don't have to worry about anything. I'm just going to go with the flow. And I'm sure the universe is going to take care of me. No, not necessarily.
Interesting viewpoint. Yeah, my own experience is mixed on that, I have to admit. But I honestly do tend to side with Abraham on that one. I think Abraham Hicks is actually on to the right thing.
That you go downstream.
Yeah.
But is he suggesting you go downstream blindly?
Well, it's not a he. It's a collective set of energies from the other side. But yes.
All right. But are they suggesting that you?
What they're actually suggesting is stop paddling so hard upstream to go upstream. Just let go.
Right. Absolutely. I agree. 100%. All I'm saying is that even downstream, there are obstacles.
And what I've learned is that I'm going to try to steer anyway, because that's who I am. That's how that's how I think most people are. But quite honestly, half the time when I try to steer, I steer myself onto the rocks. I actually would be better off if I hadn't been steering. So that's why I'm kind of on the fence about that one. Like, it might actually be a good idea to let go and just let it go.
Well, okay. And I think it's a mixture of both of those. I mean, if you're steering and you're steering onto the rocks, then you need to be steering more wisely.
But I thought I was steering wisely.
I know.
That's what's.
And then we go back to that same thing as your friend, right? Who didn't know that they were still in the trap that they had been in.
Very true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So
now let's bring.
It's complicated stuff. It's complicated
back
stuff.
To the kids who are in foster care system, because
yeah.
What my motivation was in getting this particular panel set up today, because those kids they're dealing with rapids all the time. More than rapids, they're dealing with typhoons in the middle of the ocean. So the same rules perhaps don't apply, or do they? I mean, Joel, what's your take on that? I mean, to what degree do you think that people who are kind of in that stuck place that people in the foster care system find them in, to what degree do they need to take control?
One of my main complaints and advocacy in foster care is the kids have zero control. They have no control over anything. They can't even that every decision is made by a caseworker or a committee, and it's usually built around funding and where they need to go, and it's based on old models. So they have no ability to steer anything. Even if they had the hopes of, wow, I had this one kid years ago. He was bowling with the group home he was at, and there's this family that was bowling, and they bowled every Tuesday night at this place. And this family, they are in the community, and eventually they find out this is a group home that's showing up. So this kid's always talking to them. So this is a mom and dad, and they have a teenage daughter. And so the lady inquired, what do we need to do? And all they could focus on, social services, this is down in Florida, all they could focus on is, well, how do you know about this kid? This is confidential. How do you know him? They would never get over hey, this was a chance meeting in the community. Let's follow through with this. Let's try to, the system was shutting him down, and the kid desperately thought this would be a great family for him. Fortunately, we found some people that advocated and were able to make that happen. But the system was automatically just saying they were only focused on the group home should not have allowed outsiders to even know he was in a group home. That was a violation of confidentiality. That's all they could see versus what's best for this kid. And so the kids have no steering mechanism whatsoever. It's just they're to me, they're the most marginalized, group, because they just have no voice and they're hidden. You don't know what's going on with them. So I think that, they become sort of that example of, even if they try to steer anything, they just are, they give that, just give up. Let's give into the system. Let's do what they want to do. And that's where we get, and kids that age out of foster care that don't get adopted, the odds of them going to prison are ridiculously high. They end up with addiction. They end up, they're early death. I mean, dramatically young deaths. There's only a few ways 19-year-olds that have been kicked out of foster care can make a living. There's only a few ways, and they're not good ways. For the most part, you're not going to make a living at McDonald's. So there's other. The system has them basically not through any fault of their own. That's the other part, is that they're trapped with no movement. So that's the part for me is, everything we're talking about. At least suggested being able to change a mindset where we're talking about for us or other people. These kids are just trapped in cement, and very few get out of it unless somebody shows interest. Like you're meditating with these people. I'm doing pro bono work with these young people, and I have done worked with. I found 34 kids foster adoptive homes over the years that were unadoptable kind of thing. And that's fantastic. That doesn't dent the system. That doesn't move. That's not 1% of 1%. It's nothing. And that's the frustration I show.
It's a big one. And I think that, it probably is a little different from county to county, state to state. We're fortunate. I'm fortunate that in my county, we have an excellent attorney for the Department of Social Services, and the guardian ad litem has an excellent attorney working with them, and their reports are very deep. But you're right. It's the problem is that the mom is given an attorney. The dad is given an attorney. If the mom is not competent, she's given a guardian ad litem who's an attorney. The Department of Social Services has an attorney. And then over there at the other table, where the guardian ad litem, which is supposed to be the voice of the child, is supposed to be that person who stands up for the child one-on-one directly, their advocate is a volunteer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, come on.
Yeah. And that's, the cases I get in the middle of, I raise so much hell just because, and I won't shut up. So eventually, but not everybody's doing that. Like this young man with the bowling, like I just kept saying, you guys don't understand. There's a family. This is a 14-year-old kid. There's nobody lining up to adopt him. He's cleared for adoption. These people want to foster care him. We can get therapeutic services in place. Let's go through. And they kept saying, but they shouldn't have met him in the first place. And I'm like, they did. And eventually we won, but it was just this bizarre, bunch of people that didn't, and I feel sorry for these kids. These caseworkers sometimes can have 40 kids on their caseload. They have to see them once a month. Most of them they're worn out. The turnover rate is terrible. I'm not blaming all of them on that, but just knowing that the like you're saying, you have an excellent system, but when unless the kid has a strong advocate, like somebody that is going to not be intimidated by a bunch of attorneys and just go hard, then they usually end up losing with the volunteer guard, not because they're not great people, but it's just overwhelming against him, so to speak, or him or her.
Absolutely. You think of what these volunteers, Walt, give me you have a mom, and she's had 4 kids with 3 different fathers, and the 4 kids now, so over on the lawyer's side, you've got 4 defendants. You got the mom and the 3 dads, and each one of them has a lawyer. So there's a crowd of 8 people over here at this table.
Right.
There's the Department of Social Services. So she has at her table, she's got the social worker, got the social worker's supervisor and the like. And then over at that table is where the guardian ad litem is sitting. Now, this is what this volunteer is asked to do. This volunteer is asked to, in between the status reports, and come back every couple of months for a status report on the case. In between the status reports, she is asked to go find these 4 kids who are often placed in 4 different situations. Maybe 2 of them are in a different foster home. One of them's in a therapeutic setting, and one of them is in another therapeutic setting. So she's got 4 kids that she needs to go out and talk to. She has to talk to all of their caregivers and all of the therapists and everybody that is dealing with those kids. Then she has to go and visit the mom and the 3 dads, and then take all of this data and information, including what school they're going to, how they're going to school, what meds they're on, what their therapist is saying. Take all of that data and put it into a report. And she's a volunteer. It's almost superhuman to expect.
It is, and it's just, and another commentary that it may be not appropriate all the time, and I'm not saying every single case, but most of the therapists that I've worked with that are assigned to these kids, it's not the top job you want as a therapist. It's like you don't want to be taking Medicaid payments and doing all that. So some of them are there for the right reason, but very many of them are there for, I can't find another job, and all I'm doing is filling in until I get another job. So a lot of the therapists they're working with are not bringing the good stuff, so to speak. It's real basic. And so I see that a lot. And again, I have met some fantastic people in the system, so I'm not blanket against the whole system. But when you get the Medicaid doctors, they average seeing a client for maybe 10 minutes, and they say, take this, and check with the foster mom in a month. Do we need to raise it or lower it? The young man I was talking about earlier, this psychiatrist didn't even know his mother had died. He worked with a kid for 2 years. Yeah,
that's unbelievable.
Yeah. So there's strides being made. So I'm always looking at but the system. I'm out there yelling at you don't know me too well, but I don't shut up. So and if I get involved,
I think we got a taste of that. Yeah.
I go hard on that stuff. So I don't lose these things when I get there, because I just don't stop. I've hired attorneys on my own sometimes just to do this for these kids. But the idea that we gotta that's why I'm so passionate about it. Just like bringing stuff back to the meditation you're doing with them. If every foster care kid was allowed that, if every foster care kid was allowed good nutrition and exercise and all the stuff that I advocate for, all the system would definitely be better, because they're going to be getting this. But it's the whole cycle is so frustrating for so many people. And I've adopted 3 children from foster care myself, just because, wow, I can't imagine. I just couldn't imagine not adopting them.
That's an interesting statement. You couldn't imagine not adopting them.
Yeah. Yeah. But my problem is that, by the way, I've quit asking them. They call to have me meet a kid, and I'm like, no, I cannot meet any more kids. Some people adopt. I can't meet any more kids. I cannot stop presenting me kids, because I'm too old and I don't want any more kids. But it's really a really sad thing. And budget cuts. Who's advocating for not cutting some of the foster care services? There's not a big political group advocating for that.
Yeah, my dad said to me once that politics is nothing more than an argument over how to allocate limited resources.
Yes.
So, I was on another podcast the other day, and this guy was ranting and raving about all of the terrible crimes that the Biden administration had committed. And of course, we were coming at it from a very different perspective. But he said, he's let all of these criminals in, and these people are going around and they're robbing and raping and breaking in, and they're doing all this terrible stuff. You were a prosecutor. How do we solve it? How do we stop that? Okay. So I basically just said, well, all we have to do is get the army, like Mr. Trump says, get the army, and we send them out into the streets and let them go house to house and make sure everybody shows them their ID and the like. And then he got all angry and said, well, I don't believe that. Nobody has a taste for martial law. Well, I don't want to get into the politics of all of that. But anyway, he was asking me about how do you solve the border problem. And I started getting into a discussion with him over the fact that it's all about limited resources. I mean, we could solve the border problem if you want to put enough money into it. But where are you going to take that money from? Are you going to take it from Medicare? Are you going to take it from our older citizens and their health care? Are you going to take it from Social Security? Are you going to take it from defense? Are you going to take it from food stamps? Are you going to starve our kids? I mean, where are you going to get the money? And that's the problem. As you say, in the social services, there's nobody to advocate or to be in that conversation where they're saying, no, this funding, this work has a return on investment because it keeps kids out of the criminal justice system. So you'll get your money back, and we need to better fund this system. But unfortunately, like you say, there's nobody to advocate for that. And so, a system is underfunded and overworked.
Well, definitely.
One thing that occurs to me is that as frustrating as the scenario is, and it is clearly a very frustrating scenario, there's also a beacon of hope. Mm-hmm. And I say that is, you've shared your story, Bob. Joel has shared his story numerous times about ways that each of you have been working to try to make your own little dent. And as Joel said, even with the 44 kids he helped find homes for, permanent homes for, it's barely even a drop in the bucket. And yet there's a vibrational piece to that. I'm very much into vibration because the entire universe vibrates, everything in the universe.
Yes.
And that vibrational pattern, I think of it as the ripple effect, like when you throw a rock onto a water body, right? You can just see the ripples going out. We can't see the ripples of what happens from what you do or from what Joel does or from what the small minority of people who do things. We can't really see what those ripples are doing. And yet they're out there. Joel, you gave the perfect example, the story of the young man we call Marcus, who is now truly a young man, not just he's past 18. I think you said he's in college now. And if I remember correctly, he's pursuing a degree in psychology.
Yes, he is.
And so he wants to kind of continue the work that you introduced him to.
Yes, that's what he wants to do.
There's a ripple that's going on right there. There's an example of a ripple you can actually see.
Right. Walt, I heard that this renowned Buddhist teacher was coming to a temple down in Raleigh, and I had to go see him. And we were put into a classroom, and he started doing his class. And I don't know, maybe I was just in a cynical mood that day, But, Buddhism's about teaching loving kindness, compassion, all that stuff. I'm saying it because I was in a cynical mood that day.
Got it. Yeah.
And so I raised my hand and I said, teacher, come on. Everything that you're teaching, they've been teaching this stuff for 4,000 years, and always that the teacher has been followed by a real small group of adherents while the rest of the world is running around with torches and swords. And why do we think it's going to be any different now? And he chuckled and he goes, well, that's an irrelevant question. I I go, why? Why is that? Why? And he goes, well, because no matter what I say, are you going to change your life and wake up any different tomorrow and not do the good things you do? I said, well, no. He goes, well, it's irrelevant. And he says, no, here's the answer. And Walt, I want to tell you, Joel, I want to tell you, this was something that turned me around on a dime, and I still remember it to this day. He looked right at me and he burned his eyes straight into me and he said, it's because you never know when the tipping point comes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You never know when the tipping point comes. So you get up and you go back and you get your 45th kid and your 46th kid, and you get up and you go and you get into the fight and you go and do it again and again, because you never know when the tipping point comes. And
Exactly.
that has been a huge piece of my life.
Well said. Well said.
The thing about that tipping point too is we have a tendency to think that there's one
Right.
Yeah. And in fact,
Right.
it's an endless series of tipping points.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true too.
Yeah.
It's true too.
Yeah. So every single one of those tipping points matters.
Mm-hmm. So you get up and you go back in it, and it's all you can do. A lot of people, a lot of my students, they say, well, if you keep talking, you talk about present moment, present, be in the present, be in the present. Well, then, like, how do you figure out what's going to happen in the future? So I said, there's two answers. One, when you plan, then plan. I mean, focus on it and attend to your planning and planning in the present for the future with your full attention. But the other thing is, I promise you, if you take care of what's on your plate right now and you do the very best that you can with the very next thing that you need to do, then the future will take care of itself. You don't have to worry about it. Walt, as you say, if you put that energy out now with good intention and with good heart, and I do the best that I can with what's on my plate right now, the universe will respond to it.
Absolutely.
And I'm one who learned that the hard way, as Joel can attest to, by the way.
Yes, he did.
Notice he doesn't take any time. He just dumps it in and agrees.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I am and have been for all my life a planner, just like you were describing. I had to foresee every possibility. I had to plan the whole thing out. And my life didn't improve until I stopped doing that. Mm-hmm. I just had to stop. I had to just say, enough. Everything that I planned fails. Well, maybe I should stop planning.
Yeah.
And once I stopped planning, everything started to get better.
Right. It's like that old joke, Doc, it hurts when I do this.
That's right.
Yeah, so don't do that.
Don't do that. Well, it took me a while to learn not to do that, Some of us take a little longer than others do. That's the nature of things. Mm-hmm. Guys, this has been everything I was hoping for and then some. Thank you so much, Bob, for joining us and sharing your story with Joel so he could share his story with you. And
mm-hmm. It's been wonderful meeting you, Joe.
I want to tell both of you guys. I want to tell you both that I admire so much what you guys have done, particularly within that foster care arena, not because of any major shift that took place, but because of all those minor ripples. I love the minor ripples.
Yes.
I mean, they're just, to me, they blow me away, to be perfectly honest. And what I can tell you is this, we live in a time now where everybody talks about how there's this great divide and everybody's so divided and there's all this chaos and crisis going on. I swear to God, guys, I can't look anywhere without seeing fabulous progress going on right now. I have trouble. I know the divide is out there. I understand what people are talking about. I get it. I just don't experience it like they do. I look around and even the person who is struggling the most, who is furthest behind, who just doesn't get any of it, my goodness, I'm seeing the growth happening. It's mind-boggling. So to me, the ripples are just like, they're everywhere. I mean, they're just, I can't begin to even count them. There are so many of them. And they all come out of things like what you guys do. Not just you, by the way. You're not the only one.
Yeah, no. Thousands and thousands.
Thousands of people, yes.
Thousands of people. I think Gandhi said that a candle's light is not diminished by lighting other candles.
Right. That's right. Yeah, good stuff. Well, thank you guys very much. Bob, thank you so much for coming back, and nice to see you a second time. Thank you
Good
for
to see
comparing me
you.
to a Shaolin priest. That's the first time it's ever been happening to me. So I like that. Hey, all right. I must have made progress. This is good stuff. I like this. No, seriously, very much appreciate it. Thank you for joining us today. We really do love it. And Joel, as usual, man, you did your usual thing. I mean, people don't know this. Joel actually was kind of under the weather. He's still dealing with like a bug that was going around. You wouldn't know it. I mean, from what he said and so forth, you don't hear it at all. But that was actually Joel struggling because Bob, normally what happens is he dominates about 45% of the conversation, and then the other 75% after that, and then 90% after that. This time it was like, he actually took a 1/3 and he was done. Like, oh my God, this isn't Joel.
Yeah. I had to cough in between, so that was great. Bob, great to meet you. Walt, fantastic. Look forward to talking next week.
All right, and we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
All right. Bye.